Uhuru. Black is back. Black is back. God damn it, black is back. Uhuru, comrades, it's good to be here amongst revolutionaries and forces from various organizations, but still have the ability to be under one banner, one program, opposing the U.S. government's imperialist wars being waged against oppressed people around the world. And I really appreciate the leadership of Chairman Amali Yeshitela for calling this particular question around the other wars that, as has been said before, rarely, if ever, addressed by the typical, well, I shouldn't say typical, but opportunists, both of the white left as well as even the African middle class, who, for one reason or another, don't have the ability to address the pain and suffering of oppressed people when it's not in their immediate interest to do so. And as I was listening to Comrade Glenn's presentation, I was thinking about an experience that I had as an organizer with the Uhuru movement, where in the city of Philadelphia, a couple of years ago, there was a brother by the name of Sharon Coachman who was strangled to death by the cops in West Philly. And, you know, not unlike police violence that occurs throughout this country, and not unlike responses to that type of violence, our movement responded, holding a militant demonstration on the block where the brother was murdered by the cops. But what was interesting was that this demonstration happened on the same day that there was this big concert held, I think it was in either the Spectrum or where the Phillies play their games. But the point is that all the white people who wanted to go in the concert, by the way, it was a benefit called Live Aid, or Aid for Africa, something to that effect, right? You've heard of that before. They did it back in the 80s as well, where it's this humanitarian effort where all the white people can feel good about themselves because they bought a ticket or they donated money to stop the hunger in Africa. But what was interesting was that as the white people who were going to the concert, there was actually a shuttle bus that was taking them from either the regional rail or some public transportation. It was a shuttle bus that went directly through West Philly, through the African community and through the block where we were holding the demonstration opposing the war that's being waged against African people right here in the U.S., right in the very city in which they live. And so, you know, that was, for me, very educational. And it really helped to clarify the material basis for the inability of not just the white left, but other sectors of the white community, their inability to, on their own, challenge the war against the African community, and I would imagine against other oppressed people as well. But, you know, that's the duality of the question I guess we're dealing with, and I think that this is a very important discussion and forum that we're having right now, because it's giving not only forces from the white left the opportunity to take the correct stance around these questions, but also it deepens our understanding around what needs to be done. And with that said, speaking of what needs to be done, you know, and Comrade Glenn and others have pretty much laid out a vivid picture in terms of what this war means in the lives of our people throughout this country and around the world. We've heard all types of evidence that supports the claim and the argument that indeed the U.S. government is waging a war against African people, against the Mexican people, against oppressed people around the world. There's no doubt that it is a war being waged against us. But we also, in this discussion, have to talk about what is to be done to defeat this war and to win freedom for ourselves and oppressed people around the world. And so in that context, I want to offer up a discussion about police terror that's happening in the streets of Southeast D.C., of Detroit, of Compton, California, and throughout this country. And also to put forth our understanding as the Uhuru movement in terms of what the basis for all these attacks against our people is. And when I first joined the movement, I heard the chairman, and I'm sure many of y'all have heard it as well, when he talks about this thing that's called the state, which is an organization of repression. You know, it's, the state is the organization, an entity in society that exists anytime there's a split between those who have and those who don't have, especially when those who have it as a result or a consequence of taking everything from those who don't have. And that describes the situation for African people to a T. It sums up the situation for the Mexican people and everybody else who's been a victim of Europe's attack on the rest of the world. And indeed, it was an attack, and it's an ongoing war. And so, but this is what we understand when we talk about the police. The police is part of this organization of repression. You know, and it's evolved over time. Of course, when the attack on Africa began, they wasn't necessarily called the Philadelphia Police Department or Homeland Security or whatnot, but it's not as though Africans willingly got on the slave ship and said, you know, white man, go ahead, you can take me over to America and I'm going to work for free for you and all that. There had to be a repressive force in place to make sure that African people submitted to the will of white power. And so during that period, there was perhaps armies under the employment of the English government or private mercenaries, if you will, under the employment of these companies who profited from the enslavement of African people and the theft of our resources. And, you know, even here in the U.S. during the period of slavery, I'm told, and my understanding is that the police as an organization that we know it today got its origins in the period of slavery, where anytime an African wanted to be free, would run away or fight back, resist against the slave master, there had to be, once again, an organization in place to protect the interests of the slave master. And the term paddy wagon refers to the vehicle that was used by the slave catchers in South Carolina when they would go out into the rice paddies of South Carolina looking for runaway slaves. You know, this is the origin of the police that we know it today. It has always been an organization in place to protect the status quo, to make sure that all of the resources and labor of African people and oppressed people uncontestedly go to feed white power. So that's our understanding of the state, you know, and the state is always repressive. It's always repressive, no matter where it is and no matter who is in control of the state. The state is repressive in England right now, where you got the Bobbies on patrol, terrorizing African youth. The state is repressive in Libya right now, even in the form of the U.S. government, the U.S. Army and whatnot. The state is repressive, carrying out the interests of white power in Libya right now. And the state is repressive in Cuba too, a revolutionary government. But the state in that instance is an organization of repression that is used to repress the exploiters, those who would oppress and exploit the labor of working people and oppressed people. But the point is that the state is always repressive. And so as such, well, we're not necessarily opposed to the state, but we do call the question, you know, who should be in control of the state, and especially the relationship of that question, what that relationship has to the conditions that we suffer. So these are some things that we understand as the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the Uhuru Movement as a whole. And I want to offer that up, because if we don't get into that question of the state, then we'll continuously be trying to understand the question of police violence in some type of abstract, like, well, maybe, you know, the police chief in this city just don't got the right policy, or there hasn't been enough training provided, you know, to the police. They just don't know how to, they're not from the community. They don't know how to deal with us, right? These are the types of explanations that come forth. They need sensitivity training, etc. Y'all heard it all before. Y'all on the front lines. You know what they say. But if we understand the question of the state, then we go past all that and we get to the root of the question, which is not how are we going to try to convince the capitalist, colonialist state to somehow treat us in a less violent or oppressive manner. But the real question becomes, how can the poor and oppressed African community seize control of the state? How can we have our own police to go down to City Hall or the Senate or even the White House and tell the real criminals how we understand criminality to put their hands up in a sooner position? So this is our understanding as an organization. And another aspect of our analysis is that when we talk about war, it's true, this is war. But at its fundamental level, we're not just talking about war as such, but we're talking about political struggle. In fact, Mao Zedong was the one who said that political struggle ain't nothing but war without bloodshed, and war is political struggle with bloodshed. And so that's another part of the question that we got to understand, because even if we were to somehow get a certain type of power, the question still remains of which political, which social force would lead in the effort to build a society that serves the needs of oppressed working people around the world, and particularly in our community. So we know that in the final analysis, we involved in a political struggle for black power under the leadership of the African working class and of true revolutionary national democratic forces. And that's NPDOM's mission. But, you know, I've been asked to come here particularly to speak on the question of the police terror that occurs in the African community. And I'm very honored to do so. And I hope that I can contribute something to this discussion by not just giving you anecdotes or even statistics as such, although I do have some statistics for you, but to also help you understand what the relationship of the existence, the presence of the police in our community has to the general conditions of existence in the African community. And like we said, you know, the police ain't just out here just to lock us up as such, but the police, Homeland Security, FBI, and every other instrument of the state, this organization of oppression, they are in place to keep African people separated from our freedom and our resources. And when we understand that, then you understand why it is that when it's time to eat, even when you're hungry, and you see grocery stores full of food, you know, and even though your family hungry, you may have worked all your life, your people work very hard. The Mexican people, we know what type of labor put in by the Mexican people in terms of agriculture. We know how much work African people put in. But in the face of all that labor that oppressed people have performed over the last 500 years, you still to this day can't just walk up into Safeway or 7-Eleven and take what you want. That's when we see the significance of this thing that we call the state, because the police will come, not necessarily when you call them, but certainly when the owner of Safeway or 7-Eleven calls them, you know they're going to show up very quickly to lock your black ass up, and then you're going to be working for free in the prison, which is also an instrument of the state, generating more wealth for white power. So these are things that we understand. As I was preparing this presentation, you know, I was trying to understand, like, you know, how, you know, this war really manifests itself in terms of what the police do right now. Because, you know, we know there's all types of spheres of political and economic life in the African community where we always see the intervention of the police. You know, when it's time to pay this landlord that don't never want to make no repairs, if you don't want to pay him, they call the sheriff. Right, and regardless of what your position is, this white man or Negro with a gun is there to make sure that you get the hell out. You know, you see conditions of hunger that we just described. You see even around the healthcare question where you're sick and you got hospitals that got empty beds, or even if they don't got empty beds, they got the ability, they got the means to provide healthcare for anybody who is sick. But despite all this wealth and capacity to solve the problems for the people, none of these entities do it unless it's in their interest, unless they're getting some profit out of it or some political gain. And the police, the state, will always intervene on behalf of the owners of the hospitals and the owners of the food, grocery stores, of the landlords, etc. The police and the state will always intervene to make sure that the interests of the capitalists are maintained at all times. And the fact is that the hunger in the African community that comes as a consequence of that separation from our resources is directly a result of the intervention of the state. For example, we got right now, as doing research for this presentation, discovered that according to the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 10.9% of the U.S. population is what they refer to as food insecure, which basically means that you dying, you starving to death. You don't got no food. Now, this is a statistic put forth by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 10.9%. And you know that 10.9% ain't the white folk, right? And I don't just say that, you know, because I'm guessing in the blind, but I say that because we also know that right now in today's U.S. society, the average African household has only 10 cents for every dollar had by the average white household. And that relationship exists because of the same attack on Africa that happened 500 years ago is happening to this day. So we know that that 10.9% that is now starving to death is not it's not the white people. It is the colonized people. It's the oppressed whose resources, you know, where we should be eating. Instead, all of the food is in the suburbs or in the white community. And at the same time that 10.9% of the U.S. population is starving to death, you have another 9.8% that is in prison for robbery. Right? And I hope y'all see the connection, because this also calls into question what even the question of law really gets down to, right? Because, you know, the chairman taught me and taught many of us that, you know, the law ain't nothing but the opinion of those in power, of the ruling class. And so in a situation where, you know, the owners of Safeway are the same ones that write the law, right? Of course, they're going to call the one, the African or the Mexican that go up in the Safeway, take some food for his or her family. They're going to say you commit robbery. And now you find yourself locked up in prison simply for taking back the resources that were yours to begin with. And it's really striking to me that, you know, this really kind of plays out like 10.9% starving and another 10% is in prison for trying to get something to eat. You see? So, and if this ain't a social system, I don't know what is, brothers and sisters. You know, on the question of healthcare right now, we talked about it. In doing research, and I know there's comrades who work with the All African People's Development Empowerment Project who could probably run off the stats even better than I could, but, you know, I found out that in the city of D.C., that 1.75 out of every 100 African children will not even survive their birth. You know, almost 2 out of every 100, 2% of our children will not survive birth, right? Now, again, it's not as though the healthcare industry doesn't have the ability to provide the means for African people to come into the world, right? I mean, they got a whole lot of money off of our blood, sweat, and tears, not only here, but around the world. But notwithstanding that, you have these glaring statistics. And again, if I were to go into Kings County Hospital, where I was born, and, you know, put a gun to the doctor's head and say, you're going to deliver my child, you know, whether you want to or not, then we see, you know, what the state is responsible for doing. And there's all types of other examples. You know, curable diseases our people die from all the time. Diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, etc. All of that is happening because we don't have state power. We don't have the ability to carry out and to provide health care for our own people. And that's because we don't have the state power to do so. And so these are some of the things that we understand. Also, on the question, and also, brothers and sisters, all these examples of the poverty and the lack of health care, this is all one form of colonial violence or another. It's not as though, you starving to death is any different from you getting shot in the back by the police. These are all forms of colonial violence, and that's something that we got to understand as well. But in terms of, the straight up, textbook, the classic so-called police brutality, which I really don't even like to say, because to say police brutality is really redundant. It's like saying wet water, You already said it's wet because it's water. The police are violent by their very nature, but the point is that the police brutality, the violence that the police carry out against our people all the time is another tactic, a necessary tactic to maintain the status quo. Because, in the real world, out here in the streets, you're not going to have a situation where Africans are just going to let the police keep us separated from our resources. You never, ever, ever had a situation since African people been held captive here in the U.S. where there's not some form of resistance or another. That's real. And they can call it aggravated assault or resistant arrest. They can call you a rebel rouser, if they want to, but the reality is that we have a right and a responsibility to resist all forms of colonial violence and occupation in our community. And so we reject this claim that African people are the criminal, but the fact is that there's resistance happening amongst the people all the time. And the state is well aware of, the resistance that's brimming just below the surface in the African community all the time, especially since the Black Power revolution of the 1960s. I can't see, I don't got my glasses, bro. 1 minute. But so the thing is that resistance is always, if not just below the surface, it's happening right now. And the more imperialism attacks African people, attacks us out of its own need to survive, the more this resistance is going to become apparent and show itself, and it should, And we say that African people have a right and a responsibility to resist. We also saying that increasingly that African and oppressed people around the world are not just engaged in resistance against colonial occupation by the police and the state as a whole without consciousness, but more and more we're seeing evidence of there being real consciousness behind the resistance. For example, recently, and I believe it was St. Louis, there's an article on the Uhuru News you should check out that talks about the African resistance and uses an example of a brother that admittedly killed a cop in St. Louis because the police murdered his girlfriend. And during the trial in which they were attempting to lock him up, he was cool. He was saying, yeah, I did it. I shot him. And he also said something to the effect that, political power comes from the barrel of a gun. He said that, it ain't no other way for us to get justice but to respond with the same violence that they have been imposing on us. And so these are the types of articulations that are coming out of the community more and more. Our responsibility as revolutionaries, as organizers, as democratic forces is to provide more not only consciousness to this resistance, but to give it organizational leadership, to help the resistance understand not only that the police is this occupying force in the community that need to be dealt with, but the greater question is the political struggle that we're involved in, of which the resistance against colonial occupation must be a part. Not independent of, but you must, if you resist the police occupation, it must be in the name of the self-determination of African people, the demand for community control of health care, of schools, and of the things that African people need to survive. So these are some of the demands that we believe strongly need to be coming forth. They're not going to fall out the sky. They're only going to be embraced by the people if we take them to the people. And this is the responsibility of not only the NPDOM, but of the Black is Back Coalition and our program that makes demands that speak to all of these critical questions that's impacting on the lives of our people. And ultimately, the demands that will lead to Black power, should they be achieved. So I'm going to get out the way. I appreciate leadership of Chairman Omali Ishatella and all the other organizers of this event for providing the space for this presentation. Uhuru.